Douglas T. Stewart.
That's me.
I'm Peter Knox. Do you prefer to be called Douglas or
Sir.
T-Bone, Sir?
No,
Mr. Stewart?
Douglas is ideal for me. I've never really been a Dougie.
No.
There's only two people I think who've ever called me Dougie, and funnily enough, both of them were called Rachel. One of them used to be in BMX Bandits, and one of them was a person I worked with. And for the two of them, it was okay, but no one else.
Yeah. You mentioned the BMX Bandits there. Would you tell us a little bit about where you started, where you went, and where you ended up?
Yeah, BMX Bandits started pretty much in 1985. I'd been in another group as a teenager with friends, including Hugh McLaughlin, who I just saw minutes ago, Francis McKee, who went on to be in the Vaselines, Sean Dixon, who went on to be in BMX Bandits and also in the Soup Dragons, and Norman Blake, who obviously went on to be in Teenage Fan Club and was a BMX band for a while. We'd a band called The Pretty Flowers, and when that band finished, and it pretty much I think finished because Frances had hooked up with Eugene and decided she wanted to start making music with him, and I was left with a kind of bunch of songs, and Sean had just started a group called the Soup Dragons, and he said to me, I'll help you do these songs, I'll help you record them. And initially it was just, I think the plan was we would just record the songs and I would maybe give a tape to some people, almost like I'd been a fan of the television personalities, so I would give Dan Tracy a tape, and I would give Stephen Pastel a tape, and I would get an address for John from Richmond and send him a tape, just to almost go, I love all of you guys and here's what I do. And that was as far as it went. And so one of the people who got a tape was Stephen Pastel, and I really didn't expect anything of it. And the next time I saw Stephen, who I didn't really know at that time, he sort of said, I've just started a record label with David Keegan from the Shop Assistants, and would you like to make a record for us? And it was a bit like, wow. And so BMX Bandits suddenly became a kind of ongoing concern, because I wasn't sure if that was going to be what I was doing, from that point on.
What were you doing before that?
Well, yeah, it was the Pretty Flowers. I mean, I sort of fancied making more music, but it was just almost like.
Were you working on the side and?
Yeah.
Was it sign-on culture?
I'm trying to think what if I had. I mean, there was different times where I had sort of jobs and things like art in places like art centres and stuff like that, kind of community arts and things. Taught life drawing at one point and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm not actually even particularly good at drawing, but I'd studied art, so I ended up doing that. And I used to do bits of acting and stuff at a kind of community theatre group. And but yeah, music was what I knew I wanted to do, but I didn't necessarily expect that suddenly it was almost like there hadn't been a plan. We hadn't went out with a demo, but we'd went like, send this to lots of companies and we'll get a deal or something like that.
Big time.
It was just almost like an unexpected kind of accident that Stephen really liked the tape, and I think he thought I seemed like an interesting personality. I think he said since then, and Alan McGee was the same as this. Alan McGee, who ran Creation Records, who we were on later, both of them would actually say that they would always, it wouldn't be just the music it would draw them, it would be the personalities. So if they sort of liked you or found you interesting as a person, they sort of were invested in that and sort of thought, I think that person could do interesting things, because they seem kind of like, I want to know more about what they think and what they like and stuff, and what they have to say. So
you made that first album. When are we talking then?
Well, it was funny because we made a bunch of singles initially, and then 1987 first single came out in 1986, and then 1987 the label pretty much folded,
Right.
and we'd had like one of our singles had been like #1 in the indie charts and really done, I mean, really well, sold thousands and thousands of copies, and we set that at that point we sent off a bunch of tapes to people, and I think we sent off something like 25 tapes and we got one reply.
Right.
And as I say, at that time we were like, we would play something like a New Cross venue and we'd have maybe 500 people come to the show, but
Right.
people were going, that's over, that's the 86 thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's now 1987. C86 is over. And you know, the only label that wrote back to us sort of said, you know, if I'd been offered BMX Bandits last year, I'd have been just like, wow, I can't believe this is going, but I think it's over. And but being a kind of bloody minded sort of individual, I didn't necessarily accept that.
Yeah.
And I decided I would release our own album. I would pay for it to get recorded and raise the money and release our own album. And so I think it was 1988 I started working towards that, and our first album came out in 1989. It was recorded back to back with Teenage Fan Club's first album. And obviously there was a real crossover there because Francis McDonald at that time was the drummer in both the bands, and Norman was probably at that point the second main songwriter in BMX Bandits, and he was the kind of lead songwriter at that point in Teenage Fan Club. So he, you know, it was like the day, I can't remember what way round it was, but the day one of us finished the album, the next day the other group were in exactly the same studio with a kind of crossover of members, and I think I was probably as many of the Teenage Fan Club sessions pretty much as I was at the BMX Bandit sessions. Not that I was actually probably contributing anything, but I guess it was like, I often say this thing, and it sort of almost sounds a bit corny, but I think of BMX Bandits as not being so much like a group, being like an extended musical family. But out with that, there's a bigger extended musical family, I think, in the Glasgow musical community. So I guess certainly at that time, it just felt natural that people would be hanging out at each other's sessions and rehearsals and things, even if you weren't in the band.
And is that still going on?
It's a little bit different now because we're not like in our late teens or early 20s anymore. So people actually have real stuff in their life, like, you know, they have you know, proper sort of relationships, and quite often they'll have family and stuff like that. And some of us who, you know, haven't maybe been as fortunate with the level of commercial success as something like Teenage Fan Club or Belle and Sebastian, you know, quite a lot of us will also have day jobs, so you won't have necessarily the same just opportunity to just like hang out all the time. You know, Norman now lives in Canada, so you know, I think he would be a little bit surprised if I just started turning up every day at his place, and you know,
you're still pals though, aren't you?
Yeah, and the last gig BMX Bandits did in Glasgow was at Kelvin Grove Bandstand in the summer, and Norman was one of the guitarists in the band for that set. You know, and up until the new album, which we've just finished recording, I think Norman is on every BMX Bandits record. He's not on the new one. We've locked him out, but you know, he left the band officially in something like 1991. But that's just the nature of BMX Bandits. You know, people. I make this comparison a lot, but I think it's a good one. It's like Hotel California for a lot of people. They can check out anything they want, but they can never leave, you know. So you may think you've left BMX Bandits, but you know, there's a good chance 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later, you might suddenly find yourself back on stage playing with us again.
So you recorded that first album, it went down a storm.
Yeah, it was funny because people around me who I kind of trusted said that they really, really loved it. It didn't, the music papers, I think, had sort of decided to write us off. They just sort of thought, BMX Bandits, that's a silly name, and they're obviously some sort of joke band, and we're not even going to bother listening. So it didn't get much attention that sort of way. I mean, there was occasional people like John Robb who would be very supportive, but majority of writers in the music press weren't interested. Funnily enough, people in kind of broadsheets would be kind of, looking at it with favour, and we would still get like some sort of attention on radio and stuff. But yeah, it didn't sell particularly as well, and it came out at the worst possible time. It was getting distributed by the whole cartel, the rough trade distribution wing, and that suddenly went bankrupt. And things like all of your stock, even though it was your stock, you couldn't get it. It was seized, and funds were seized, and there would be labels like Creation, which I think lost hundreds of thousands of pounds, and it nearly crushed them. And I didn't lose obviously anything like that, but for me to suddenly be down £10,000 when I was a sort of person who didn't really have much money, was difficult. But our salvation came in the form of Japan. We were still managing to play to sizable audiences. We'd sort of built up, I guess, almost like cult following, very loyal following in quite a lot of places. We'd play, to quite a few hundred people in places like the New Cross venue in London, and a Japanese guy called Tetsuya was at one of the concerts and approached me and sort of said, I'd really like to reissue the album that you've just made, because I know it's not available just now, because all the copies are, and I'd like to bring it out in Japan. And I was like, yeah, that's great, that's really great. And then it got even better, because he was like, but before I reissue that one, I want you to make a new album, which we'll pay for. And I'll release that in Britain and in Japan. And then it got even better when he was like, and I'd like you to go over to Japan and like play. In the first visit, maybe just like yourself, and I could find some Japanese musicians to back you up. But I'll take over the rest of the band and yourself. And the second visit, I was like, I've not even been once. And now it's already there's going to be a second visit. And
did you love it? Was it brilliant?
And it was it was an amazing experience, because it was just, I mean, we would have fans from other countries turning up at some gigs, but just the notion of I'd hardly travelled at all. I think I'd been to Germany once. I think that was the only time I'd been outside the country. And suddenly I was in this place, it just felt like a different planet in many ways. And I was meeting these people who seemed to just know every single thing about our music and really, really care about it, and know about all of the connections between us and other bands and our friends. And at that time I didn't know anyone else in the being. We were sort of almost like the first of that family of bands. We went before the Pastels went, we went before like Teenage Fan Club went, and it was like that. So it was, as well as there been people who were excited about BMX Bandits, there were people in the audience who would kind of come along knowing we were sort of connected with the Pastels or connected with the Vaselines or with Teenage Fan Club or whatever, and they couldn't see them. So they were like, well, this band have apparently got something to do with them, so we'll go and see. So it kind of was and it was a great thing, because they liked us. They came along and they liked us. So it was the people that really knew us, and then there was a kind of, I think, a kind of a little bit of a younger audience who knew some of these bands who'd been more active, or starting to be more active around about that time. And it was just an amazing experience. And as I say, at this Japanese pickup band who played the songs so accurately to how they were recorded, in a way that at that time we had never managed to do. They were just so perfect,
Was it a wee bit unnerving? Like
sort of-
joining a band that is your band and it can play just as well as your band.
Well, as I say, we played them technically much more accurate to the way they were recorded, and it was uncanny, and just like people singing along with the songs and stuff like that, and yeah, it was incredibly exciting, and I think that was a real, point of change, in my life, and then Teenage Fan Club were, signed to Creation Records, and when we were making the album for Vinyl Japan, we'd finished the album, and we were in the studio after we'd done all those tracks, and I was like, I've got an idea for another song, and I'd sung it down the phone to Norman that morning, and I was like, I quite fancy, could I just, before we start mixing, could I just try and record this, it's not part of this album, and so we recorded it. It was called Serious Drugs, and it felt pretty different. I mean, it was like 1991, and I think it was at that time the whole thing of a slightly mellower, not noisy guitars kind of sound with like lots of harmonies. Nobody was really particularly doing that yet. It took a little while for it to. It took about something like 2.5 years to finally get released, just because we were still on this other label. But Alan McGee heard that when he was up visiting Teenage Fan Club, and I think he heard the track and was like, "Oh, well, that's going to be a single." And Norm was like, "What? Actually, that's not us." And he was like, "Oh, who is it?" And Norm was like, "Oh, it's BMX Bandits." And Alan had this kind of prejudice about, he'd never heard BMX Bandits, but he just had a notion in his head what he thought we represented. And he heard that song and he was like, that's not what I thought BMX Bandits were. And then he listened to other songs and he came to see us live, and he became a real champion of the band, because he had this notion of, well, I was wrong, and I think there's lots of other people who've got the wrong end of the stick about what BMX Bandits are. So I'm going to prove to them that we should listen to BMX Bandits with an open mind and an open heart. And yeah, so I'm kind of glad. I think a lot of people, when the C86 thing kind of started to fizzle out and people were turning against it and the press were turning against it, I think a lot of people just went, right, game over.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it wasn't like ever, that wasn't an option.
No.
By that point, this was what I was doing with my life. So
Alan snatches up.
mm-hmm.
How did that work out?
It was great. I mean, we never. I think Alan really thought we were going to be. And he said this, that we were going to be a major band on a label, and I think he thought that I would kind of cross over and have a sort of a kind of profile out with the band and be almost like, kind of known kind of personality or something like that. And that never really happened. And again, it was like a bizarre thing that happens with timing. Serious Drugs, it took a while to be released, and by that point some other bands were starting to do almost a kind of sound that was a bit more in that world, but people loved it anyway. When we started like playing it to radio producers and journalists, and Alan was really behind it. People were really loving it, and Radio 1 DJs were like, it's going to be on the A-list, it's going to be a record of the week, it's going to be. Then Radio 1 had for Anti-Drugs Week. The week our singles getting released. And although Serious Drugs wasn't about recreational drug use, they just couldn't have a record that the hook was get some serious drugs as getting played at the same time as every third record there would have been Radio 1's Anti-Drugs Week. So
instead of dropping Anti-Drugs Week, they dropped Yes.
Yeah,
that's not fair.
But a bizarre thing, at roughly the same time, Ebenezer Good got through, and that was getting played during the Anti-Drugs Week. And that was actually blatantly saying E's are good.
Yeah.
And we weren't. That wasn't what we were about at all. And but we were kind of a victim of it. And but Alan, stayed very supportive, and we made 3 albums for Creation. And again, the timing thing, Oasis came along.
Were they fans of yours?
I don't think they would have liked us at all. I can't
No.
imagine them. But their first tour was with BMX Bandits. You know,
Right.
as Alan McGee phoned me up and said, Douglas, I've signed this band. It's got there's 2 brothers in it, and I think we're going to be absolutely huge. And I've been asking some of the other bands on the label if you'd take them out on tour, and everybody's saying no. And I really, you know, I love Alan. I think he's a great guy, and he'd been so supportive to us. And I was like, well, of course, you know, it would be ridiculous of me to suddenly go, no way, you know, after all he'd done for us. So I was like, yeah, of course. And we were on tour with a band called 18 Wheeler, and Oasis would go on first and play to almost nobody.
Mm-hmm.
And then 18 Wheeler would come on, and then it was us. And it was interesting because I didn't really connect to what Oasis did. Some of the guys in the band really loved them, and Francis and I didn't really kind of connect with what we did. But I remember Alan phoning me during the tour and saying, because there was something, I was like, I think they're going to be you two. You could just, I think it was particularly Liam, there was just something about him. He just had this incredible confidence. It made him seem like this guy's already a star. He may be playing to 20 people, but he's just got that thing about him.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't surprised when he became the huge thing that we did. And, you know, and
Did they take you on tour as to return
No.
the favour?
well, there was talk that was going to be, you know, I remember Noel saying, yeah, we'll pay you back, and we've never had the a phone call.
Yeah.
Yet.
Come on, Noel.
Yeah, see, that's the thing now, it's difficult. Who would I go out with? But I'm okay about that. So, yeah, but the thing is, a band like that becoming so successful for a label like Creation, you'd think, well, that would suddenly be great for all of the other bands in the label, because suddenly there'd be all this revenue coming in, and they'd have a sort of level of clout. And there's something sort of true in that, but suddenly the priority is Oasis.
Alright.
And all of the bands who aren't performing quite well, it's not like they're suddenly subsidised by it. Suddenly it's just like, well, we don't actually have the time. And that wasn't a choice of Alan or of Dick Green. It was just by that point, the big money men had, you know, come in. The big guys from Sony had come in, the big guns, and it's a bit like, no, we need to streamline this and just like have people focused on this big thing that can make us lots of money. And also there's this band like Primal Scream, they can make us quite a bit of money. There's this band, they can make us a bit of money. BMX Bandits, 18 Wheeler, these bands, they're never going to make us any money. You know, and so it was sort of taking out of the hands of the people who had the kind of vision and passion and really were the guys who created Creation. It was their creation, but it was sort of taken out of their hands, and it was
The accountants ended up making the creative decisions.
and it was a kind of they were kind of victims of their own success. They weren't personally victims of their own success because they obviously walked away from it, having done pretty well. But unfortunately, the label itself was a victim of the staggering success that they had with Oasis.
And you've got Elephant now, is that right?
Yeah, we sort of built up a relationship with Elephant, who are based in Spain. Round about the time, actually, we were finishing making records for Creation, and since then, we've stayed friends with them. We released a one-off single when we were still on Creation with Elephant. They're really great people. I've produced a couple of records for other artists that have been released on Elephant. And our last album, BMX Bandits in Space, apart from a couple of compilations, was the first proper album that we made for Elephant, being our label. in a sort of label around the world, you know. And yeah, I mean, there's a few people that run labels of that sort in different places where, again, they feel like we're part of their family, you know. And you know, I would trust. They're the sort of people I would trust with my life, you know. And I feel, you know, I'm trusting them with something that's more important than that, you know, because it's like, I guess for people who make music and are kind of really serious about it, and it becomes the biggest part of for life, that's almost more important than anything, you know. And they're such fans of what we do, and they, you know, again, they'll give me enough rope to just allow me to do what I sort of think is right. They don't kind of question it, we just go, we want to support you, we want to hear the records that you want to make. You don't have to think about, you know, is there a hit there? Of course, it's a BMX Spanish record, of course there's not a hit there, you know, but at one point I guess there was expectations that would happen, and now it's just about like, they don't care about that, they just want a record that they would love as fans, and they want the excitement of sharing that with other people. A bit like you or I, if we had a friend round and went, wait to hear this record I love. That's what they're like, but it's on an international scale. They want people to hear these records that they love. And yes, so I'm incredibly pleased that they're doing the new record, because there's a few I think quite unexpected moments on it.
Well, yeah, you let me listen to a wee bit of it, and there's some bits that have got a kind of, they're quite grand but in a really minimal sort of way, and I think that's something that's maybe some of it's on. I guess that doesn't just happen, does it?
Yeah, some of it's also a bit darker, I think, than some of the BMX stuff. There's still a bit of light and a bit of humour, but some of the stuff is a little bit darker. And I think also when we started working on this album, because of the nature of BMX Bandits, it's not like a typical group. Most of this record was made by myself and Stewart, who, strictly speaking, isn't actually even a member of BMX Bandits just now. He has been in the past, and again, he turns up and ends up playing some shows with us, but he's not like a full-time BMX bandit. But we just started, like, I don't know why. He had the time, he had recording facilities, and we just started like recording some of the tracks, and then it gained a momentum. This way we'd found to work in these tracks, and Chloe got involved in some of the tracks and did a bit of writing in some of the tracks, and there's one of her own songs in it. And Joe Kane, who's a Glasgow musician who plays in lots of different projects, again, he's not a BMX bandit, but he's on it. Anton Newcomb from around Jonestown Massacre, I wrote a track with him and recorded a track with him when Chloe and I were over in Berlin. And
will that be on your album?
Yeah, and it's a BMX Bandits track. And the people who play more regularly in the group, I'm very, very fortunate, because these people are incredibly gifted musicians, but they're also very egoless, and so they're not threatened by the notion of, wait a minute, I'm the bass player in this band, or I'm the drummer in this, how come I'm not in any tracks? They realise it's not about that, and there'll be another BMX Bandits record like the last one, which they will be on, you know, and it's part of a bigger picture. And also, even if they're not physically on this record, just the fact of what they've brought to the band over the years, they're still part of the DNA that led to these tracks being what they are. So it wasn't like I had a plan of, oh, I'm just going to make this record with Stewart and shut all the other guys out. It's just, it got to a certain point and Stewart and I were like, I think we've got an album, or we're damn close to having an album. And we could see a shape in it and things, and you know, when I mentioned it to any of the other members of the group, people go, "Oh wow, a new BMX Bandits album." They never went, Well, it's a side project.
Yeah.
You know, because as I say, I'm very fortunate.
So
in
you
that
finished it all? Is it just
Yeah.
just a bit of mastering and putting
Yeah,
it out?
it's just to be mastered and artwork put together, and as I say, I was kind of like thinking the Elephant Night go, well, if we could have these tracks, but maybe just, but no, they were very happy to include everything that we'd recorded for it, and there was a couple of real last minute additions. It was strange because I kept listening to it and almost holding it back and kind of going for something it's not there. It's just a little, there's a different